Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Hewitt. I'm a certified lay minister with the Green Valley United Methodist Church in Henderson, Nevada. Now, I mention my name and church in case someone from another church might be joining us on this study because it is on YouTube. So, in fact, feel free to send the link and invite other people to watch and join with us on Sunday morning to see how the scripture is used in the sermon. Now, each week during our separation due to the coronavirus, I've been doing a brief study of the scripture that will be used as the basis for the sermon. This will probably be my last one for a while, as Lynn and I head off for some vacation time. Plus, Pastor Mary will be taking over worship leadership on the 5th, so it's just a new and exciting time in the life of our church. Now, this week's scripture is from Luke, chapter 1, verses 46 through 55. The Gospel of Luke is probably the most widely read during the Christmas season, as it gives that traditional story of Christmas in chapter 2. But in chapter 1, we find a pregnant Mary visiting her cousin Elizabeth, who is pregnant with John the Baptist. Mary then proclaims her devotion to God and gives a hint about the child that she's about to give birth to. This passage is called Mary's Song, but it's also called the Magnificat because it means, "My soul magnifies the Lord." It is Mary's song of praise. Now let's take a few minutes and read through this beautiful song of praise. Okay, let's begin now. The early church saw Mary's song as an expression of salvation that God sent through Jesus. And as you've read this, if you read it like I have before, you see this amazing beauty in this passage. But that view is not universal. For those who had power, it was seen as a threat. It was a challenge to their power and their selfish powers, because it would exalt those of low status in society. It threatened to upset the balance of power and control. So as beautiful as this praise is, it was seen by many as political and controversial, and it's still controversial today. Mary is rejoicing not by what she might do, but what would be done by her son. In the 21st century America, we live a pretty comfortable life with an unheard of degree of religious freedom. Now, when I was at the university, I had fellow Christian professors tell me that they felt persecuted for their religion. But I never saw or experienced anything like this. I was a member of the same church as the chancellor, the associate chancellor, the athletic director, and a huge number of professors. So I knew that there was no bias or persecution, at least coming from the highest levels. But my point is, we really don't know what religious persecution looks like, at least not like the first century Christians endured. In biblical times, the Jews, like Mary, were struggling even to be second-class citizens. Now, the Pharisees had carved out kind of a nice niche for themselves, but for the most part, it was a very tough life. And when you look at the latter verses of Mary's song, it's easy to see why that she could make people feel very uncomfortable. Mary was really stirring the pot. And today we would accuse Mary of making the Bible political. Now we come to something that just jumps out at me, and I'm sure you may be a little curious too after having read this. Mary was probably 15 years old, and I think that's putting her at maybe the upper age level. Girls at that time were not well educated, and they had no formal training. So as I read this, I recognize that I would have a very tough time writing anything like this, being so beautiful and elegant. So, did Mary really write this? Probably not. The date of Luke's writing is either around 60 AD, and maybe a little later, around 70, and possibly even into the 80s. So, how's that for being definitive? So, for something to have been written by Mary 60 or more years before, how did Luke get it? He wasn't around back when Mary was pregnant with Jesus. Luke wasn't one of the 12 apostles, but he probably was one of the 70 disciples appointed by Jesus that we read about in Luke chapter 10. So we really don't know how much contact Luke had with Mary. We know that Luke was a close friend and companion of Paul's, but we don't know how much time Paul or Luke spent with Mary. We know that Mary spent her later years near a spring in the hills above Ephesus, so she must have had some contact with Luke and Paul. There's just a lot of unknowns in this. Now, most scholars see a strong connection between Mary's song and the prayer of Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. And if you read it, and I urge you to, that's 1 Samuel 2, 1 through 10, you'll hear a very similar story of a people who are depressed, oppressed, and suppressed, with the Lord taking action against the wealthy and the powerful. So it's very, very easy to see the parallel between these two verses, two scriptures. Now, does that damage our faith if Mary wasn't the legal author or the actual author? I know it certainly doesn't concern me. It's the message that's the most important thing. It is a political message that God does not like those who oppress, and the oppressed shall be raised up. So even if Mary didn't actually write it, Luke attributed he attributed this verse to her, this passage to her for a reason. And it gives us an introduction to the child that Mary is pregnant with and about the radical change he was about to bring into the world. So that's it. Have a good week, and I'll see you in the church.